Welcome to the Education Corner, a podcast by Education Choices magazine.
Education Corner podcast would like to welcome James Dahl, Master of Wellington College, Berkshire. Wellington College, located in Crowthorne, Berkshire, is an excellent co-educational day and boarding school which seeks to enable its 1,200 students aged between 13 to 18 to help serve and shape a better world. Life at Wellington College is underpinned by its key values: kindness, courage, respect, integrity, and responsibility. Academic expectations at Wellington are high, and the school's sporting excellence has an international reputation. Master James Dahl has been at the school since 2013 and was appointed 15th Master of Wellington College in September 2019. James Dahl began his teaching career under Anthony Selden at Brighton College, becoming head of classics and then head of sixth form. James left Brighton to become a housemaster at Repton for several years before moving to Berkshire. Since joining Wellington, James has worked to broaden the college's social purpose and support through significant grants and bursary schemes. Today, he talks to us about the possibility of VAT being introduced to school fees and the possible impact of this on social mobility and student support. Welcome to our podcast. The possibility of independent schools losing VAT exemption is something many schools and parents are concerned about. What do you have in place at Wellington to support your families, looking like now VAT will be imposed?
Yeah. So I think the starting point is to say that, like most schools, in fact, I think probably all schools, starting position is we don't want any family to have to be in a position where they have to move their child from our school. So a bit like we did during the pandemic, we are setting aside significant amounts of additional financial aid. 10% of the pupils at Wellington are already in receipt of significant bursaries and financial aid anyway. And we have been planning for this for quite some time so that those families who need extra support to be able to get through the years ahead is there. The longer term issue for us, of course, is planning for that over the next 10 years. An increasing number of families are going to need to be in receipt of bursaries and fee discounts in order to access schools like ours. So there's the short-term piece of looking after and supporting the families who are within the system now. And then, of course, there's that longer-term piece of how do we continue to make Wellington as accessible to as many families as possible moving forward. Perhaps we'll come on to talk about that in a bit too.
A survey by Salters suggests that 140,000 pupils might move from private schools. And I've been reading even over the weekend, the ISC are talking about already they believe that 10,000 people have already left or not re-entered the independent school sector. What's the risk of schools being unable to continue running if so many pupils leave the independent sector?
It will simply be the case that they won't be able to continue running. And we've already seen that, but probably a dozen or so independent schools that have closed in the last 6 to 9 months. Obviously, the factors behind those closures are complex. The Labour government would argue that that hasn't even been introduced yet, so how can it be responsible to it? But there is undoubtedly the case that the schools which are smaller, that perhaps cater for more niche demands like SEND or faith-based schools or more rural schools, particularly in the prep sector, those schools where margins are so tight anyway. You know, for some of these schools, losing 5, 10, 15 families is the difference between being able to survive and having to close. And so, you know, the big unknown is how many pupils will simply not enter our sector over the next 5 to 10 years because of the increase in fees. What is the lag effect of that going to be? I spoke just before about all schools trying to see their current families and pupils through, but what's the lag impact going to be? And very sadly, I think the lag impact is going to be that fewer will come into our sector, and that will mean school closures. And I don't think that's anything that anyone should be happy about. These are young people whose lives and educations will be significantly impacted by this change. And, you know, that's not good.
Obviously, it's also going to have a knock-on effect, and I think it's being discussed in the Telegraph. Whilst Labour are saying that by imposing the VAT, it should raise 1.5 billion to go towards raising state school standards. If the number of children that people are beginning to believe move into the state sector, certainly the Adam Smith Institute have said that the costs could actually be greater and be close to 1.8 billion. How do you see the VAT is imposed and this all does go ahead? I know that Wellington have a lot of partner schools and you work closely together. What do you think the impact's going to be on them?
I mean, the first thing to say, Chloe, is that the fundamental aspiration of having more resources available for the state sector to be able to recruit more teachers and to support mental health provision. Now, fundamentally, I totally agree with that. I think we're all acutely aware that the 1.5 billion figure, which is bandied around, is very unlikely to be reached. And depending on what the influx or what the transmigration is across from independent to state will depend whether this is a revenue generating or even it'll be a cost to the Department for Education in the long term. That is unknown at the moment. But fundamentally, the rationale behind it, I understand. I think it's also worth saying 6,500 new teachers for the state sector. There are 23,000 state schools in the country. So 6,500 new teachers equates to one new teacher for every 4 state schools that there are in the country. So this idea, this policy is somehow going to be able to transform and uplift the resourcing and the funding within the state sector, is just not true. One extra teacher for schools isn't going to do that. But there are some areas of the country where the state system has capacity. There are schools that have an ability to take pupils in. And that's actually in my local area as well. We're connected to a lot of local schools here in Crowthorne and Berkshire in the southeast. And many of those schools aren't full. But there are parts of the country where the state system is creaking and there aren't gaps. And what is the big unknown is where in the country is that exodus or outflux of currently independent educated students or families who were going to choose independent but now will go state? And does that necessarily tally with the parts of the country where there are spaces in the state sector? And no one quite knows that. So I'm sure that if there is a move across, that some parts of the country will be able to cope with that relatively well, but there will be others where that won't be the case. And then I go back to putting the young people at the heart of this question. The damage that would be done to them, their educational journey, their mental health. These are young people, and our Secretary of State for Education and our Department for Education, it really should be thinking about the 100% of children who are in our schools. And one of the things that I feel most sad about this is that doesn't seem to be the case yet. And individual children, their well-being, their educational journey doesn't seem to be at the heart of the decision making here, and that feels very wrong. So, what will be the impact on the state system? I think some state schools will be able to absorb and cope. Some state schools will struggle. I think much has been made in the press about SEND children and those on EHCPs, or even those with significant SEND needs who haven't got EHCPs. That is already an issue for the state sector. And if there is a significant influx of children who need significant input and the resources and support just isn't there within the state sector, then obviously that's going to put those schools under pressure. And again, I go back to putting the young people at the heart of our thinking. It's going to negatively impact their educational journeys and inevitably their well-being and mental health. So none of us can predict it, Chloe, but I think it will have a significantly negative impact on a number of children and a number of schools.
The last time you spoke on the podcast in 2021, you stated schools like Wellington shouldn't be an ivory tower keeping the world out, but should be a bastion of excellence, sharing resources, a generous partner that gives to the outside world. And I know that ethos at Wellington continues. You have the Prince Albert Foundation, which I think we talked about, and the Learning Alliance, which supports a number of pupils through the school and beyond. Could you tell us a little bit more about the importance and impact of these?
Yes, of course. So the Prince Albert Foundation is a socially transformational bursary scheme. It is designed to enable children of potential, but from backgrounds of low income or disadvantage, from households which, I guess for a better adjective, might be chaotic. It enables them to enjoy the stability of a boarding education here at Wellington. And when I became Master in September 2019, I wanted to grow our Prince Albert Foundation to have 40 Prince Albert scholars in the college by September 2025. Our community got behind it so much. We've raised £20 million to fund these transformational bursaries that we've actually hit that figure of 40 Prince Albert scholars a year early. And I would add that 2 of our current Prince Albert scholars are children who have been within the care system in the past. And we are now covering the cost of their education so that doesn't fall upon the state. So the impact of that for these young people, we hope, is to allow them to fulfill their potential, to drive ambition, to ensure that their lives end up going on a track that is very, very different from the one which potentially it could have been. And funnily enough, I was having dinner just 2 nights ago with one of our Prince Albert scholars who was talking about the fact that the thing that has changed the most in him is this sense of ambition, that he can achieve anything and that he can go and get anything in life now. And I hope that that will stay with him for the rest of the life. But of course, the impact on us as a community is massive too. We are lifted up and inspired by having these incredible young people with us who come from a diverse set of backgrounds, but who end up having as much impact on the school as we hope to have on them through their presence. So the Prince Albert Foundation is something of which I'm so proud. The Learning Alliance is something slightly different. This is the term for our partnership with 63 state primary and secondary schools. So we have teacher-to-teacher collaboration and we have student-based collaboration as well. So the teacher-to-teacher support is simply designed to spread best practice throughout the entire education sector. So the best research, the best training, the best thought leadership conferences. Our Festival of Education we run every July. We cover the cost of all of the state school teachers who attend that festival. So last year we had 6,000 visitors over 2 days in July, and we paid for over 4,000 free tickets for state school teachers because we believe fundamentally that our educational charitable purpose is to promote education, not just for the benefit of the 1,200 students who come to school at Wellington, but for those tens of thousands of students and thousands of teachers who work and live and learn across all of those partner state schools. And we hope that the impact of that will that we raise standards across the entire education sector by generously sharing all of those opportunities. At a student level, it is simply our Learning Alliance. We want to give as many students at those 63 partner state schools the same sorts of experiences that Wellington students have, whether that's from careers, networking opportunities and internships, whether it's Oxbridge preparation, whether it's leadership days. We had a leadership day here at the college yesterday for year 7 students, and half of the attendees were from prep schools and half of the attendees were from partner state schools. You know, we believe passionately that we should share all of these rich transformational educational opportunities as generously as possible across those 63 partner state schools. Yes, so the Prince Albert Foundation is about widening access here at the college, and the Learning Alliance is about just spreading the love as much across the education sector as possible.
And very impressive. I mean, 63 schools, wow. Some people are suggesting that bursaries and support such as this will be some of the first things to be cut if VAT is introduced. Do you think that this is the case, and how are you working together? I've spoken obviously to other schools to try and protect the offering that you have.
I hope that it wouldn't be the case. I believe passionately that it's never been more important for our sector to widen access as far as possible for perhaps a reason that I'll come on to say later. But I fear that for some schools who are at the margins, where, as I said earlier, if 10, 15 families leave, existing becomes an issue for them. I fear that some of these programs will be what goes. And what are we doing to protect it? Well, a number of schools, I think, over recent years have realised that they need to diversify their revenue streams. And that's something that Wellington has been doing for many, many years. We commercially let our facilities in all the holidays. And of course, we have a large international family of schools. And quite simply, all of the money that we make from these commercial ventures, we divert that into our social responsibility and public benefit work. So our educational grants, our Prince Albert Foundation, as well as philanthropic fundraising, our Learning Alliance programme, all of that partnership work, all of the staff who work within that, we cover the cost of that through our commercial revenue. And so as long as we have a strong commercial revenue, which we will, we'll continue to fund those programs because we believe, as I said passionately, that we have a responsibility to play that positive role in the wider education sector. There are, I know, many schools who fund their bursaries and their social responsibility work out of direct fee income. And I just wonder whether in the years to come, that is going to be a position which they can hold on to. I'm not saying that's a wrong thing to do, but I just wonder as fees go up, parents will quite understandably say, well, look, I want 100% of the fees that I'm paying to you as a school to be going on my child's education. And I don't think that's an unreasonable request. So I do fear, even though I wouldn't agree with it, I do fear, and I understand it, that many schools will start cutting back on those bursaries and that public outreach and that sort of social responsibility work. But I would implore them to try and be creative and find ways not to row back on them.
Yeah, I think that we certainly know of a few examples of schools where I can't remember, there's X percent of the fees goes into the bursary pot, and that's kind of established. And I obviously spoke to Dr. Joe Spence in the summer talking about philanthropy. And obviously, if parents are paying more, perhaps there'll be less in the pot to give. So it is a concern. Wellington College was founded on charitable principles, especially educating children of servicemen. If this VAT is imposed, the continuity of education allowance, which currently supports many of the military families to access education for their children, may not cover the increased costs. How do you continue to support these families today, and what's being done to protect that access into the future?
Yeah, this is an issue that's particularly close to my heart. My wife is the daughter of a soldier, and she benefited from the continuity of education allowance through her childhood. So as her father was posted all around the world, in active service in various regions and war zones, she was able to enjoy or have access to an undisrupted education. And I think we really need to look after our military families moving forward. These are families who give up their entire lives for service of the nation. And that was the very foundation of Wellington College. We were founded as a school to educate orphans of people who lost their lives in war zones in service for this country. And we have a number of foundationers still in the school that we cover the entire costs of their education. So we will continue with that. And I know that the Boarding Schools Association, the BSA, is lobbying very hard at the moment for continuity for education allowance to be increased. Chloe, the harsh reality is where it is set currently doesn't really cover the costs of most boarding schools' fees. So a lot of schools, ours included, we will means test and we will top up in order to enable those families to be able to access a boarding place and have that continuity of education for their children. And I think we're just going to need to allocate more resources to that on a case-by-case basis. But I really, really do hope that the government will see sense and will increase that CEA in order to protect those men and women who very often give their lives for our nation.
On the school's website, it states, "Since I was appointed master, a key focus has been thinking about what next." And you emphasise investing in people and social responsibility, which obviously we're discussing in this whole podcast. But across the sector, lots of schools are making efforts to prepare for an uncertain future and invest in social mobility in recent years. What impact do you think this introduction of VAT could have on social mobility, being kind of the bigger issue here, and schools' ability to prepare pupils of all backgrounds to thrive in what they face is quite an uncertain future?
Well, quite simply, the tragic irony and perversity of this policy is that it's going to make independent schools, so many of whom, if not all of whom, have worked so hard over the last few decades to broaden access and raise money for bursaries and do more in that social responsibility space. The perversity of it is this is going to make our schools more out of reach to a greater number of families. And so it will diminish social mobility. I have absolutely no doubt about that. That cannot be a good thing either for our schools or for young people. I don't know whether that point is sort of made quite strongly enough in the various arguments that take place in the media. We will become more exclusive as a sector as a result, and that runs counter to what we all believe in. It also, I think, runs counter to what the Labour government believe in. I think if financial aid is cut, as we've just been talking about in your previous point as well, that's going to exacerbate it even more. And none of us want our schools to become schools where, you have the super wealthy and then perhaps you have a small number of pupils on transformational bursaries. We want our schools to reflect as best as we can the broader mix of society as a whole. And that has to be the aim. But I think that will be one of the first things to go if this policy is enacted and is enacted as quickly and unsensitively as it is being proposed at the moment.
It's a big concern. You work closely with organisations, including Royal Springboard as an example, which supports children from low-income families and gives them access to education and a future that includes accessing some of the top schools, including Wellington College and universities in the country. We've had in the magazine different people talking about how this has changed their lives, and many children are so grateful for the work and the benefits that they get. Do you feel concerned that if the government does apply VAT, this could also affect the support schools can give to these bodies such as Royal Springboard?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I don't think it will just simply be on sort of means tested bursaries that some schools will row back. It will be on these sort of broader, larger, socially transformational bursaries. And actually, this is where we can have the biggest impact in terms of transforming the lives of young people from backgrounds of real disadvantage. I just go back to the two Wellingtonians that we have currently who've been in the care system. We are not just, I hope, doing a really good thing for those individuals, but I hope we're being a really good citizen within our broader public life by helping alleviate the burden on the state to look after children like this. And I know Ali Henderson at Royal Springboard is really passionate about this, the role that the independent sector can have on children, and particularly with boarding children who the stability of boarding, I guess in contrast to what might be quite a chaotic home life, the impact that you can have there is almost immeasurable. And I do really fear that bursaries of all sorts, both those sort of significant top-up bursaries, but also the socially transformational bursaries, will take a backward step as a result of that. And that cannot be good for the children or indeed for social mobility.
What advice have you as a school been giving to parents who perhaps are coming in concerned? I know that many letters went out in the last few weeks preempting what's going to happen in January. What's your best advice to them?
Just to keep talking to us. So my Bursa COO has, like all of the heads and bursars of all of the schools, has been having lots of conversations with lots of people, and we're so keen to support, we're so keen to help. As I said at the beginning of this interview, we don't want anyone to have to leave. So in the very short term, our advice is just come and talk to us and let's work together to plot a route forward. I think the longer term advice is trickier. As you know, we have one family at our prep school who've got 3 children of prep school age, and they came in to speak to Ed Venables, the head down there. And the point they made, which is quite right, is that, you know, we've budgeted, we've planned, we've got everything set up, and suddenly the imposition of VAT is like having a 4th child that we haven't planned for. And so, you know, on the one hand, I was really pleased that they were in dialogue with the school and just talking about how we could work together to get through it. But it brought into sharp relief the pressures that so many families will be facing. And I guess the biggest piece of advice I'd give any family is simply just to speak to your heads and your bursars about this, because we all want to support, and we can only do that in conversation and partnership with parents.
Where do you think this will lead in the future for independent education? I know that some of the heads I've spoken to see a kind of shared independent state sector perhaps in the future.
I think 4 things for me on the impact of the independent sector. I think it will inevitably be smaller, and I'm not sure that's necessarily a good thing. I think it will have more tiers to it. So it'll be a multi-tiered sector with a greater variety of price points and provision, sort of low-cost models, medium models, maybe hybrid models in partnership with local state schools. One of the things I've always thought would be incredible would be for independent schools and state schools to sort of partner in the employment of teaching staff, and for teachers to be co-employed by 2 different schools and to be adding value across the piece. I think for schools like mine, boarding and the affordability of boarding is something that I'm concerned about. And I want as many people to be able to board, whether they're UK based or international, because boarding is wonderful. But I fear that there might be fewer boarders and perhaps fewer UK boarders moving forward, and then the knock-on effects of that. But I think the other thing that will inevitably have to be the case in the independent sector is schools will need to be able to fund, if they want to keep their schools as broad and as wide in terms of access as possible, they're going to have to be doing more and more in terms of financial aid. And as we've discussed over the last 20 minutes, that might be contrary to what many schools are planning to do, which is cutting back on financial aid in order to make savings. So yeah, I fear it'll be slightly smaller, more tiered, fewer borders, but with hopefully more financial aid to enable that access.
And on a happy note, I know that things at Wellington are always busy, but do share with us some exciting news from Wellington that's been going on recently.
Well, we've opened our 18th boarding house 5 weeks ago. It's called Elizabeth House, in memory and commemoration of our late monarch. It's a co-educational 6th form house, and it's the final piece of the jigsaw, Chloe, because it's slightly weighted in favour of girls. So we've got 20 new lower 6 girls and 15 new lower 6 boys joined this year, and we'll do the same next year. And so September 2025, which is the 50th anniversary of us being a co-educational school, we will be 50-50 boys, girls in our pupil body. And so we're going to have a massive celebration next year, 50 years of co-education with 50-50 boys, girls in the school. So yeah, that's something to put a smile on our faces.
I knew you'd have something good to say. On a final note, we have seen recent posts, knowing Ed so well, we wanted to wish Ed Venables and the prefects the best of luck. I know it's this weekend, their Three Peaks Walk in aid of Young Lives versus Cancer.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I'm not entirely sure what we're letting ourselves in for. We've got to drive up Saturday afternoon. We'll get there about 11 o'clock at night, stay in a Premier Inn, and then we've got to get walking at 7 a.m.
Wow.
And then it's a 12-hour walk up Three Peaks. And so we'll be finished by 7 p.m. But we've already raised over £12,000 for this brilliant charity that is actually really close to many of our hearts here at Wellington at the moment. Ed is a hardened mountaineer. I am an amateur. So whether I'll be able to do all 3 peaks or whether I'll be dipping out after 1 or 2, but you know what, just to spend 12 hours doing something amazing with an incredible group of young people, I can't wait. So thank you so much, Chloe.
Thank you.